What is the creepiest thing you've seen in the woods? Or in the mountains, or in deserts or caves, or in small towns, or in remote or rural areas, or while on a particular aerocraft? Mail Story 1. The railroad tracks stretched out ahead of us, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by trees pressing in from both sides. It had that eerie, forgotten vibe, like the world had moved on but left this place behind. My girlfriend walked ahead, her boots crunching on the gravel, while I lagged a bit, taking in the quiet. The kind of silence that feels too perfect, like something's waiting to break it. We came to a bridge. The wooden planks half-rotted, but still holding up. Below it, a creek gurgled lazily, shimmering through the sparse sunlight breaking the canopy. I felt the pull to explore under the bridge, maybe find some old junk washed up or see if there were any fish in the water. She stopped me, though, pointing into the woods across from us. Her face had that tense look that said she wasn't messing around. I followed her finger, squinting through the trees. At first, I didn't see anything, just shadows and tangled underbrush. But then a figure shifted, pale against the dark trunks. A man, sitting on his haunches like he'd been crouched there for hours. His hair hung greasy and wild, like he hadn't touched a brush in years. My first instinct was to brush it off. Just some weird dude out here. Not unheard of. I stepped down the slope toward the creek anyway, figuring he'd mind his business and we'd mind ours. But the guy stood up as I moved, completely bare. No shoes, no clothes, just stark naked in the middle of the woods. His skin caught the light, and it was like looking at some animal that wasn't supposed to be there. My gut twisted, and I turned on my heel, motioning for her to follow. We didn't say a word as we backtracked along the tracks, quick but not so fast did it look like panic. The gravel crunched louder under my boots. I glanced over my shoulder once we'd put some distance behind us. There he was, standing smack in the middle of the trail where we'd just been. He didn't move, just stared. I didn't linger, didn't wait to see if he followed. We didn't stop until the car was in sight. That silent creep burned into my memory. Mail Story 2. The house sat at the edge of town, sagging like it carried a lifetime of bad memories. I parked in the dirt driveway, dust curling up behind my tires, and grabbed my clipboard. Another day, another job, I thought, stepping onto the creaking porch. The owner, a wiry man with a hollow smile, greeted me. His voice rasped like he'd been sucking on old air filters. He gestured me inside. The place smelled like mold and desperation. The thick carpets muffled my steps, and the air felt heavy, like it had settled years ago and refused to move. We ran through the usual pre-inspection checklist until I asked to see the water heater. Without a word, the man shuffled into the kitchen and started dragging the refrigerator across the floor. The fridge groaned against the linoleum, revealing a patch of old carpet. He peeled it back like opening a wound, exposing a trap door. I'd done thousands of these inspections, but this was a first. Hidden basements always set me on edge, but I played it cool, nodded, and clicked on my flashlight. The wooden stairs descended into darkness, and the smell hit me, a sickly mix of decay and damp. I leaned down, shining the beam into the gloom. A dead cat lay at the foot of the stairs, ribs poking through patchy fur. Not unusual, but it made my stomach twist. I stepped down carefully, scanning for black widows. Another skeleton caught my eye, then another. I stopped counting at 10. Some were so decayed they looked like lumps of charcoal. The hair on my neck prickled. Poison? Gas leaks? Something wasn't right. I turned my flashlight toward the far wall, where the water heater crouched like a forgotten relic. Bones were piled in front of it, scattered like someone had dumped a box of Halloween decorations. Upstairs, I heard nothing. I glanced back. The man stood at the top of the stairs, one hand resting on the doorframe, his other hand gripped the edge of the door. He didn't blink. He didn't move. Something primal screamed at me to leave. I bounded up the stairs, brushing past him without a word, muttering about needing tools. I was in my truck before the door clicked shut behind me, speeding out of there with the kind of urgency you don't second guess. I filed the report as non-feasible. Whatever was going on in that basement, I wasn't sticking around to find out. Mail story 3. The air in the mountains feels thicker at night, heavy with pine and damp earth. My breath puffed like faint clouds as I shuffled out of my tent, the chill biting at my bare arms. The campfire had long since died, leaving a faint glow of embers that didn't do much against the dark. My headlamp's faint circle of light bounced as I stepped over roots, searching for a good spot to relieve myself. The crunch of gravel underfoot echoed a little too loud in the stillness. I stopped about 20 feet from camp, unzipped, and let the stream flow. Then came the sound. Small, deliberate, like the shift of weight on loose rock. My stomach twisted, the kind of dread that grips tight without asking permission. I stopped, midstream, eyes darting toward the noise. The darkness beyond my headlamp swallowed everything. My ears tuned in, hoping it was just the wind scraping through trees. But there it was again, rocks scuffing, like someone or something was moving just out of sight. I hurriedly zipped up, heart hammering as I turned. The beam from my headlamp swung wide, lighting up fragments of the forest. Shadows stretched and twisted. That's when I saw them. Eyes, low to the ground, flickering like scattered stars. Not 2, not 4, 20, maybe more. Pairs of glowing orbs fixed right on me, reflecting back the light like mirrors. For a second, it felt like my pulse stopped. My legs turned to stone. The thought of bolting shot through my brain, but something primal kept me glued. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just stared. And then it came. A long, bleeding sound that cut through the air. Not menacing, not monstrous, but loud and abrupt. The sound broke the spell. The eyes started shifting, stepping forward. My headlamp caught the outline of shaggy fur, stubby horns, and floppy ears. Goats. A damn herd of mountain goats. They crowded closer, sniffing at me like I was some alien in their world. I exhaled hard, realizing I'd been holding my breath. The tension melted away in a rush, leaving me lightheaded. I waved a hand like an idiot, shooing them off. They barely flinched, just staring as if I'd disrupted their midnight meeting. One gave me another loud bleat before they slowly turned and wandered back into the shadows, hooves clicking softly on the stones. I trudged back to camp, the absurdity of the moment sinking in. Stupid goats. Male story 4. A little over 18 years ago, I had just wrapped up my time in the military. It felt surreal to be out, my old life packed neatly behind me in the trunk of my car. Louisiana to Montana was a straight shot, miles ticking by in rhythm with the hum of my engine, nothing out of the ordinary, just highways, gas stations, and endless stretches of Americana. After a few days at home, I got restless. Boise was waiting. February meant icy roads and unpredictable weather, so instead of taking the treacherous route straight through Idaho, I veered west into Washington, cutting through the Panhandle. The morning I hit the state line was cloaked in fog so dense it felt alive, curling around the car like a silent second passenger. It was early, Sunday morning, dead quiet, the kind of quiet where the world feels hollowed out. I'd been on the road a couple of hours when the urge hit. Nature's call wasn't polite about it either. Normally, I'd pull over and handle it roadside, perk of being in the middle of nowhere. But the fog spooked me. Visibility was trash. No way was I standing blind on the shoulder waiting for a semi to clip me. I decided to wait until I hit the next town. 5 miles later, Salvation appeared on a weathered green sign. Linder, or Linden, or something. The name's a blur now, but I remember thinking it sounded forgettable. A quick right off the interstate and I was on a narrow road leading into town. Small place, smaller than I expected. I'm used to quiet, being from Montana, but this was different. The air felt heavy, wrong somehow. There were cars parked along the street, a couple of shops, a diner, the kind of places you'd expect to see people bustling in and out of, even on a foggy morning. But there wasn't a soul. Not one. Not on the sidewalks, not behind the windows, not even a stray cat darting across the road. Just silence. I pulled into a gas station, a grimy one-stop with pumps, a repair shop, and a tiny convenience store. The lights were on, but nobody was there. I walked around to check the bathroom. Locked. Figures. That's when I noticed the Coke truck. It sat idle in the middle of the street, headlights on, hazard lights blinking, both doors hanging open. No driver, no noise, just the truck sitting there like it had been abandoned mid-delivery. My skin prickled, and I bolted back to my car. I didn't care about the bathroom anymore. I didn't care about the Coke truck, the ghost town, any of it. I got back on I-90 and floored it, fog be damned. By the time Spokane came into view, I'd forgotten about the urge to pee altogether. Later, I tried to find the town on a map. Nothing. No trace. To this day, I haven't found it. It's like it never existed. But I know what I saw. Male Story 5, the road was pitch black, swallowed by the kind of night where even the moon bails out. My car headlights sliced through the darkness, bouncing off trees that hunched over the road like nosy onlookers. It was just me and the quiet hum of my car, the familiar routine of winding through empty woods after another soul-sucking shift. Then she appeared out of nowhere. This figure hurled itself into my headlights. I slammed the brakes hard, tires screeching. The car wobbled to a stop as my heart pounded like it was trying to escape my chest. She stood there, arms flailing, covered in blood, not just a little. Her face, her clothes, even her hair glistened under the headlights. Screaming, mouth wide, sound ripping out of her like an animal cornered. I didn't think, I just swerved around her, hitting the gas like a reflex. But 50 feet later, I yanked the wheel to the side, pulling the car to a stop. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight it felt like my fingers might fuse to it. My brain caught up, screaming louder than she had been. Turn around. Help her. She was running toward me when I got out, limping, one arm clutching her side. The blood was real. It shone under the car lights like wet paint. Her eyes darted toward the woods, and then she whispered, "He's coming." That's when the trees seemed to close in, shadows stretching long and deep, like they were hiding something bigger than the night. I didn't ask questions. She practically collapsed as I pulled her into the car, slamming the door behind her. My phone trembled in my hand as I dialed 911, spitting out details between glances at the forest, waiting to see something, someone, burst through the trees. I hit the gas and didn't stop until the glow of the hospital parking lot washed over us. The dispatcher wanted me to wait for cops at the roadside. No chance. I told them to meet us at the hospital because there was no way I was sitting in that dark stretch, wondering if some lunatic was creeping closer with every tick of the clock. The cops showed up as nurses swarmed her. She kept glancing over her shoulder, even indoors, as if expecting him to step through the automatic doors. The woods were still out there, waiting. Male Story 6. The hike had been brutal, but exhilarating, like all good treks should be. The air smelled clean, untouched, and the trees swayed in slow waves, whispering to each other as we climbed. It was the early 90s, and we were fresh out of school, looking for something wild, something real. So when we saw the house, it felt like a mirage, a crooked thing squatting in the clearing like it had sprouted there. It had a barn, weather-beaten and leaning, with a few animals clucking and lowing lazily. Chickens scratched the dirt, and a couple of cows stared at us, more bored than alarmed. but it was the people that stopped us in our tracks. A man, wiry and rough, stepped out first. His clothes hung on him like they were borrowed, patched in ways that spoke of years, not months. Behind him, a cluster of women hovered, their faces half hidden by the barn door, like they weren't sure if they wanted to be seen. The guy had an odd, jerky walk, his eyes darting over us in a way that made my skin tighten. He spoke, but it wasn't Romanian. Not fully. It was some butchered, mangled version, like someone had handed him the language in pieces and he hadn't figured out how they fit. We strained to understand, piecing together his words like a puzzle. He asked about the president, his voice sharp with desperation, as if it was the answer to something bigger. His gaze flicked to our boots, our jackets, our backpacks. He stared like we'd dropped out of the sky. The women didn't move closer. They stayed in their tight huddle, wide-eyed and silent, clutching at each other's arms. It was like they were tethered to the barn, like stepping too far would snap some invisible line. The man offered us milk, pointing at the cows. His voice was eager, almost urgent. One of my friends waved it off, saying we had to keep moving, the sun dipping lower behind the peaks. We walked away slowly, feeling their eyes on us, not daring to look back, until we were well into the trees. Then we ran, our breaths coming in sharp bursts, every snapped twig sounding like a footstep behind us. Hours later, when we finally set up camp, nobody wanted to talk about it. We didn't sleep, not really, and when we told villagers the next day, they laughed, shook their heads. They said nobody lived there. But I swear, those eyes watching us had been very, very real. Male story 7. It started as a dare, the kind that seems fun in the safety of daylight, but feels like a mistake the moment the sun dips below the horizon. The church sat at the edge of town, its steeple listing like a drunk leaning on a lamp post. Cracked windows and peeling paint gave it the air of something abandoned long before its time, the kind of place parents warn you about but don't explain why. We went after midnight. Flashlights in hand, we slipped through the broken side door, the hinges creaking like the building itself was groaning at the intrusion. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with mildew and something metallic that clung to the back of my throat. The main hall stretched out before us, pews scattered like discarded bones, beams of moonlight slicing through the broken roof. The floor caught my eye first, a circular motif carved into the wood near where the altar had been. It looked like it might have held a podium or some centerpiece once. Now, it just held blood. Fresh blood. It pooled, thick and dark, glinting wet under the beam of my flashlight. The edges of the stain were sharp, not dried or smeared. Whatever had been there, it hadn't been long. We exchanged glances, but no one said a word. I wasn't sure if we were more afraid of being heard or acknowledging what we were looking at. Someone suggested we check the basement. It felt like a bad idea, but peer pressure is a hell of a thing. The stairs groaned under our weight, each step dropping us deeper into the suffocating dark. The air grew colder and the damp walls gleamed as if sweating. The basement was a maze of storage rooms, old Sunday school supplies, and crumbling foundations. We moved slowly, the beams of our flashlights jittering over the walls. Then, above us, footsteps, not casual or slow, running. Heavy, deliberate, racing across the floor we just left. Dust rained from the ceiling with each thud. My heart pounded to match the rhythm. We froze, flashlights snapping to the staircase. No shadows, no creak of the steps, nothing but the relentless pounding above. It didn't slow or falter, just moved back and forth, like something was pacing, hunting, waiting. We didn't wait to find out. Scrambling back up the stairs, we burst out the side door into the night. The church loomed behind us, silent once again. Its secrets locked in the dark. Male story 8. It was early fall in the hills of West Virginia, and the trees had that brittle rustle, leaves just starting to dry out. I'd gone up there to scout for deer before the season kicked in. The air had that sharp, damp smell of earth, a reminder that it had rained a few days earlier. The ground clung to my boots like it didn't want to let go, and the only sounds were my steps and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. I was maybe a mile off the dirt road when I came across the first one. A deer. Its body was twisted wrong, one leg stretched unnaturally, its hind quarters shredded down to the bone. Clean cuts. The kind that didn't make sense in the middle of nowhere. The rest of it, though, perfectly intact. Not a single fly buzzing around, and no stink, just the red sheen of exposed meat and bone catching the light. A few feet further, I saw the coyote. Its body sprawled like it had dropped mid-run, hindquarters chewed down, just like the deer's. The skin peeled back evenly, almost surgical. I crouched down and stared at it, searching the ground for tracks. Mud should have shown something. Perhaps paws. Liquid staining the grass and the path that led to the more tracks. Mud should have shown something. Perhaps abrasions in the dirt. The mud should have shown something. I stood up and scanned the area, a tightening in my chest I tried to ignore. A few paces away, tucked near a cluster of saplings, was a fox. Same deal. Its reddish fur turned crimson at the back end, peeled back, meat missing. The rest of it was untouched, its head lolling to the side like it had just dozed off. No signs of a struggle, no blood trail leading in or out. I walked a slow circle around the scene, trying to piece it together. The silence felt heavier now, like the woods were waiting on me to leave. The air stung cold against the back of my neck, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, more than just the carcasses. But I didn't see tracks, no signs of a predator, no reason for anything to be there except me. I left, retracing my path back to the road without looking back. Whatever did that, it wasn't something I wanted to meet.